Hello baby dolls, my name is Mina. Welcome to our channel, Mina Reads. This is my dog Bailey. She's joining us today for some reason. And today we are starting a new episode of my Reading Outside of My Comfort Zone series. I have two previous videos in this series, so I will leave them linked in the description below. But in this series, it's basically what it says on the tin. I read outside of my comfort zone. I would usually define my comfort zone as being romance of all subgenres. So I like dark romance, contemporary romance, I like spicy erotic romance, you know, give me all those sweet love stories. I'm gonna eat them up. In this particular episode, we're going to be taking a dive into literary fiction. So I have 3 books here that I am going to be reading this week, and we're gonna see how it goes. So I definitely have read some literary fiction in the past, certainly, but I think that it's just not a genre that I typically reach for, and so I want to see if it is maybe a genre that could be for me, and if I should be tuning in to more of the upcoming releases and things like that. So for this video, we have Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. This is going to be my third Emezi release. So I am familiar with their work, but I am working my way through their backlist, so this felt like the perfect opportunity to read this. Then we have Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. This is literary fiction, but it's also kind of has a sci-fi tilt to it because there is a time travel element in this story. It's pretty cool, so we're gonna see how that goes. And then finally, we have On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. This week, we are going to be reading some literary fiction. Hopefully, I'm gonna love it, but who knows? We'll see. I'll of course update you. And before we get into the video, I would say, can you please leave me some comments below of your literary fiction recommendations? What authors do you love? What books do you love? What books are you excited about that are coming out in the next few months? Like, let me know, because I am definitely out the loop when it comes to literary fiction. But I want to be a lit fic girly so bad. So yeah, let's get into the reading, besties. Say hi, Bales. Say hi. Alright, besties, so for our first book of the video, I am reading Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, and I am about 90 pages into it, and so I think it's finally time for me to give you my first update. So this book is kind of a time travel narrative. We're dealing with a bunch of different timelines, and so one of them is about this character named Edwin in 1912, and he is making his voyage to America. To the North American continent, and he's living in Canada. This is about him kind of living this life as a sort of listless individual. He doesn't really know what he wants to do with his life, and he's just kind of going around vibing, basically. And then we have another POV character. She is set in a more contemporary era. Let's say her timeline is like 2020, and she is living in New York. She is this character named Morella, and essentially Morella had this husband who was involved in some kind of like Ponzi scheme, and her best friend Vincent was also the wife of this guy that was in a Ponzi scheme. And once the scheme was revealed to be happening, and there was like charges brought up against these people and everything like that, her friend ended up vanishing. They no longer were acquainted, but Morella has just been struck by this intense desire to find Vincent and find out what has happened to her, what has happened to her in the years in between them knowing and being in connection with each other. And so this is about how Vincent actually kind of mysteriously dies, and Marilla is trying to figure out what the hell happened and why. And then finally we have another POV far into the future. The year is like 2203, and it is about this character named Olive, who is an author, and she is on kind of this galaxy-wide tour for her newest for one of her books. The book is like incredibly popular, so she's on a book tour doing book signings and things like that, and it's kind of her observations as this famous author and having her work out there, what that experience is like, what the tour experience is like, how much she's disliking it, how much she wants to go back home with her family. And I have to say that I think that her POV is probably the least interesting to me so far. So yeah, I will update you some more when I finish, maybe, or if something really interesting happens. But yeah, we'll see. Alright, hi y'all. So I did end up finishing Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. So I have lots and lots of thoughts to share with you. So many thoughts that I actually wrote some notes. So basically, I believe where I left off, I told you that this is a story that deals with multiple POVs, and one of the POVs is a character named Gaspari Roberts, and Gaspari Roberts is kind of this time travel agent where he is investigating this anomaly in like the space-time continuum, where there are all of these people who have experienced this weird time anomaly where there's like a collapse of a moment that happens in both, not both, but in 1912, in 2020, and in 2203, and they all happen like at the same time. So a collapse of a moment, and there's this agent trying to figure out why that is and what happened, and so he's investigating that. And I won't say too much more specifically about the plot and where it goes, because I feel like that'll kind of spoil certain elements of surprise. But I will say that this story, it really goes into some interesting things, I think, particularly in regards to the speculative element of it, because it is a time travel story. And I think one of the most interesting things about it as a time travel story is that I feel like very frequently in stories that have some grip on like what the future is, or is grappling with what they think the future is going to be, the future is always very kind of vastly different from what our present day looks like, or from what the past has looked like. It's always, you know, very shiny and chrome and different, you know, it's just all a brand new world. And I think it's pretty interesting that it kind of navigates a world where the future, you know, we're 200 years into the future, but things are kind of the same, but a little bit different. There's some human advancement, but it seems like very grounded and understated. You know, there's like, okay, there's self-driving cars, and like there's easy space travel to the moon, and people live on the moon, and like that's cool, right? But it's written in such a way where it's like, it doesn't feel like it's foreign, it doesn't feel like it's an impossible kind of advancement that you just is like so mind-blowing. You know, it just feels very understated. It feels like a natural progression of technologies that we already are seeing today, which I think is really interesting. And I thought that that was like really cool, how it explores this idea of the past, the present, and the future not being as different as we like to imagine them. We like to imagine them as being so aesthetically and culturally and socially different, but they're all very similar, you know, theoretically. I think they're all very similar. That something I didn't like about the story is that none of the characters were interesting. None of the characters were interesting people, and I don't think that being in any of their mental headspaces was like as rewarding as I would have liked it to be. I kind of liked the character of Edwin, and I thought the character Marilla was also kind of interesting, but we don't spend too much time with them. And so once we're introduced to them and introduced to their role in the story, they're mostly pushed to the side, and we get a lot of Gaspari and a lot of this character named Olive, who is this author from the future, and she is like living through a pandemic, and I just found her to be not interesting. Like, she just was not interesting at all to me, and I found her sections of the narrative to actually be the weakest. Maybe just because I have lived through the pandemic, so everything that she was talking about, you know, regarding her isolation, the boredom, the sadness that comes from living through a pandemic, from knowing that people around you are living, dying, isolated, everyone's grieving, the collective grief of living through a pandemic, like all those elements were, you know, but they didn't do anything for me, and I just found her parts of the narrative to be a complete slog. And then Gaspari, I really didn't think he was an interesting character either. I think he was used. He was a cool tool in the narrative to tell the story, but he also was not a fascinating person. Similar vein to me not finding the characters interesting, I will also say that the prose, while interesting, and while I did think that it was kind of, you know, evocative and things like that, it's also really sparse and like detached, which I know some people like, but I really didn't. And I felt like as a result of the detachment, I also felt detached. I was so uninvested in the narrative, and it took me way longer than I feel it should have for a book that's only like 250 pages. It took me weeks to finish this book. So I will say that overall it was a pretty meh reading experience for me. I think that like something that I'm finding already with this experience and some of the few other literary fictions that I read in the past is that I always find them to be interesting on a structural level, in the way that the authors are handling the linguistic elements, the way that they're handling the themes, whatever. All those things are kind of, they typically tend to interest me, and I feel, you know, vaguely impressed by them. But I don't think that I ever feel that like deep connection that I tend to feel when I'm reading other types of genre fiction that lead to me being like, oh my god, this was a 5-star experience, I loved it so much. So that is a commonality that I am noticing with literary fiction that I've read thus far. So it kind of does worry me, because I feel like I can only appreciate literary fiction in like an academic sense and not in a consumerist, I'm enjoying the story kind of way. So that is something I'm noticing so far. So like, yeah, we'll see how the other reads for this video go, but that's my current prediction. I think that maybe I am only able to appreciate literary fiction from a academic analysis kind of standpoint, and not necessarily from a, oh, I enjoyed this book, it was so wonderful and amazing and I cried 5 stars. That's my prediction, but we'll have to see how the rest of the video shapes up. Hi. It is a bit later on in the day, and I am reading On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, and I am about 24 pages in. So On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous follows a character named Little Dog, and Little Dog is writing a letter to his illiterate mother. So this is a way for him to get out all of his complicated feelings about her, because it's really interesting and complex as a narrative. One of the things that I'm really enjoying about it, because everyone talks about the prose being really gorgeous, and I do think that the prose is really gorgeous. It's very poetic. I think if you're a poetry person, then you will appreciate this. And this story is told kind of in vignettes, where we have Little Dog telling us about various moments in life that relate to his family, you know, not just his mother but also his grandmother, and these women, their impact on his life thus far. Like I said, only 20 pages in. And what I think is the most interesting about it is the fact that it is a very fragmented narrative. So it's not something that is kind of linear and where, you know, the story's starting here and it's going to end here. I don't think it's going to be that kind of story. And I really enjoy the fragmentation of it, because I think that it's a good reflection of like the mind, I guess, and the way that memory works. Because this is, like I said, it's supposed to be a letter to this character's mom. So I feel like the way that it's written, it kind of evokes this sense of like knowing, like you should be in the know already. The scattered vibe, which I think just comes from this feeling that like we are the mom. We are the mom that the story is being addressed to, and so we should have this intimate knowledge of the character that makes the fragmented, scattered thoughts all make sense, because we should know them on like a deeper level. And I kind of like that. I think that's really, really interesting, and I don't know that I've seen this too frequently in anything else that I've read before, so I'm loving it, kind of. And yeah, like, I don't know, I think that's the thing that's sticking out to me the most at the moment, is structurally what I think the structure is trying to replicate, and I like it. So yeah, I'm going to do some more reading today. Hopefully, I'm not having the greatest day ever, so I'm going to try to get lost in the pages, and I will update you when I have any more thoughts. Okay, hi all. So I am 126 pages into On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and I have to say that I am really, really loving it. I feel like it's so interesting to me, and I find myself like practically writing papers about it in my mind. Like the way that I'm thinking about it and the way that I'm analyzing it just reminds me so much of like the in-class experience and the kind of things that I would pick up on if I were reading a book for school. And I really am so drawn to the way that Ocean Vuong is playing with like form and content, and how the narrative structure is adding so much more meaning and like impact to the themes that are being discussed in this. Like, I'm just having an amazing time, honestly, analyzing it. And I feel like I don't typically approach like most of my books that I'm reading, you know, just as a hobby for fun, I don't typically tend to analyze them in this way, or at least find enjoyment in reading a book and analyzing it to this degree. But I'm having a ball because it is like simultaneously a love letter to his mom and also an indictment of her and her parenting and all of the generational trauma that was, you know, bestowed upon him from being the grandchild of someone who was living through the, you know, the harshest times of the Vietnam War, from a mother who deals with some mental health issues. His grandmother also has mental health issues, and being their focus in a way. They're trying to take care of him, they're trying to raise him in a country that is not their own. They're trying to do their best by him, but they're also not at their best mentally, physically. It's about the hardships and the sacrifices, but also the little moments of like love and intimacy in their family, but also the moments of abuse. Like, his mom is not the greatest. His mom is physically abusive at times, emotionally neglectful in others, and it's really interesting how Little Dog kind of connects these moments of intimacy and love, but also with the kind of the harshness and the brutality of his upbringing, and the way that that is being reflected in other aspects of his life, like his romantic life and everything like that. It's just all so interesting, and I'm loving it. I think that is really incredible so far, and so I am about halfway through. I've got 120-ish more pages left, and yeah, like, it's just really incredible and so interesting. And yeah, I kind of can't stop like waxing poetic about it, but it's great. So yeah, I probably will update you just when I finish the book and give my final rating, because I don't know how much more I'm gonna have to say. But the last thing I will say in this particular update is that I am absolutely astonished at the fact that this book is like full of quotes from 50 Cent lyrics. And that's like the absolute last thing I expected to find in this book, but there's 50 Cent lyrics in it. So, you know, many men wish death on me, I guess. Pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. Definitely not what I was expecting from this book, but I am loving it and it's really great. So again, gonna update you later. I do not like this camera setup at all, but I did end up finishing On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and it was absolutely incredible. I did cry a few tears near the end. I did start kind of annotating and underlining near like the second half of the book, but it was just really incredible. Like, it was good on so many different levels, and I enjoyed it a huge amount. I don't think I really have anything else to say about it that I haven't already, but like, it just was such an incredible reading experience. Absolutely loved it. And so yeah, like, this was really a good one. It was a hit, and I'm glad that we got at least one hit in this video, because the last read was a bit so I'm glad that we have a hit. And up next, I will be reading Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. So yeah, now reading the final book for this little experiment, Freshwater, and I am 70 pages into it, 72 actually, and I have to say that I think I am absolutely obsessed with it. I'm thinking that this might be my new favorite Emezi book, and maybe the best one that they have ever written. So it is definitely early days, so I'm like hoping on hope. I'm praying that I have not just jinxed it, but this is definitely my favorite thing that I have read from them thus far, which is interesting because I'm pretty sure this was like their debut, and all of the stuff that I've read by them has been, you know, written after this. So it's interesting that this one I feel is the strongest work so far, but again, I'm still pretty early, so we'll see. But Freshwater, I think that my understanding of the book before going into it was very incorrect. So I assumed that this was about a character who had like a multiple personality disorder or something, or like a split personality disorder, but this is actually more supernatural in nature, and it's essentially about like these gods, these spirits. They are inhabiting this girl named Ada's body, and so it is about how they are all in her mind and kind of controlling her and her behaviors to a certain extent, and they are encouraging this very like self-destructive behavior in her, and they are using her body as kind of like this sacred ground and forcing her to sacrifice herself in all of these little ways to assuage them. So they basically they are encouraging a lot of like self-harm behaviors, because the feelings that she emits when she engages in those behaviors, or like the color of her blood and things like that, all those things like satiate their desires, so they encourage her towards very toxic and unhealthy behaviors under the guise of caring about her. And the chapter that I'm in now, I'm on chapter 7, and so far all of the narration has been done by these spirits. So Ada feels very disembodied, like we don't really know anything about Ada's own like mental state and what her internal monologue is like, and we only know what the spirits are thinking and how the spirits are perceiving things. And so right now we are in the perspective of this spirit named Asugara, and so Asugara manifests after Ada gets into this abusive relationship, and the abusive relationship is something that she's encouraged into by some of the other spirits that were more dominant before Asugara manifests, and those spirits wanted her to be with Ada because they knew that the person was like sick and unhealthy and was going to treat Ada badly, and they wanted to see that, like they were interested in the kind of suffering that he was going to create for her, and his own suffering, because he's like very sad, pitiful piece of shit, and they find him fascinating, so they wanted to be in proximity to him, even at, you know, the cost of Ada's mental, emotional, and physical well-being. And now we have Asugara, who manifests supposedly to protect Ada, but Asugara is also encouraging unhealthy behavior, such as like calorie restriction and just like self-punishing under the guise of like self-improvement. It's just so interesting. Everything about this book is so interesting right now, and I don't think I've ever read a book anything like this, and it's so compelling and so utterly terrifying, and I would definitely say that it is really haunting and it's interesting. To me, this is just really amazing, and I kind of can't wait to read more. I need to do some homework today because I have started back to school, so I need to do some homework, but once I finish that, I will be diving back into this, and honestly I can't wait. So I'm hoping that I haven't completely jinxed the reading experience, and that it's still going to continue to be great, but like, I'm obsessed. Okay, hi friends. So I finished Freshwater, and it's over there on the thing, so I don't feel like getting it, but it was amazing. I gave it 5 stars. I just thought it was such an interesting exploration of just like mental health and spirituality, and the idea of like compulsion, the compulsion to self-destruct and self-harm in the face of various traumas. This is a very, very disturbing book, and it deals with a lot of really traumatic things. I'm gonna put like some trigger warnings up here on the screen because I can't think of everything right now, but it is definitely a story that can be very triggering. Particularly it deals with like some intimate partner violence and like sexual violence and stuff like that, self-harm. So, you know, if you are to attempt to read this, I would say that it is a very hard read, you know, subject matter wise, but this was absolutely incredible. I basically read this in one day, and it was incredible. I would also recommend listening to the audiobook, which is narrated by Emezi themselves, and it is just so good. Like, it's incredible. So I would definitely recommend it if you're an audiobook listener, to give it a shot. But yeah, it was so good. I gave it 5 stars because of course I did. Let me sit down for a second. Alright, so to sum things up, I would say that this is definitely my most successful reading outside of my comfort zone experiment. We all know I gave Freshwater 5 stars, I gave On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous 5 stars, and I gave Sea of Tranquility 3 stars. It just wasn't a book that really resonated with me, but it was still good, and I definitely think that this video, doing this experiment, it has definitely opened me up to a new world of books, I want to say, because yes, I'm an English major, so I do spend a lot of time reading and analyzing books that are, you know, they use difficult language, they're doing all types of like experiments with language and narrative structure and things like that. So it's not that I am unaccustomed to reading things like that, but I always had this idea in my head that I wouldn't really be able to enjoy reading a book like this outside of a classroom setting where there's like, you know, lots of like fertile ground for research and writing and analyzing a book through an academic lens. And so I always imagined that maybe it would be hard for me to enjoy a book in a hobbyist way if I had to put in the kind of energy and effort and interpretive skills that I use like for my major. I know that might not make like a whole lot of sense, but for me personally, as like a reading hobbyist, I prefer to read, you know, things that are light and fluffy and fun. And so I tend to shy away from things that deal with difficult themes or that are more experimental in nature regarding like the structure and everything like that. So these were definitely slightly intimidating for me, but I am so glad to know that I can enjoy these in a more lax setting. Thank you so much if you made it all the way to the end of this video, and I will see you all in my next one. Let me know what my next reading outside of my comfort zone video should be. I'm thinking we're gonna try horror because spooky season is coming upon us, so maybe we'll see. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in my next one, hopefully. Bye, you guys. Like, comment, and subscribe, and a special thank you to all of my wonderful patrons.